Hey everybody, it's Joe Jonas hanging with Jag.
Hi, this is Carly Rae Jepsen, and you're listening to Jag.
Ryan Seacrest with Jag.
It's B.O.B. So much swag with my homie Jag.
And now, a look at this week in podcasting news. It's the Jag Show podcast.
Welcome in, I'm John Gay. There are typically two types of people that start a podcast. Some throw caution to the wind and just go for it. Others meticulously plan every detail before they start. Now, there's probably a happy medium between those two extremes, but too often, folks think once they start the show, it has to stay the same format. So my advice to you this week is that it's okay to make changes to your podcast. For example, take the two biggest podcasts I listen to. The Daily from the New York Times used to run a 2-minute list of credits at the end of every Friday show. Doubt a lot of people stuck around for that. Now, they do 30 seconds at the end of each episode, thanking the staff behind the scenes. In PodSafe America, they used to have 2 segments with the hosts followed by a guest. Over the last 2 weeks, they've played with this. Sometimes they don't have a guest. Sometimes they have the guest as the middle segment and move them around. Probably because they're looking at their listening stats and what causes tune-out. By the way, you can do this on premium plans from podcast hosts like Simplecast, Libsyn, and Blueberry. And even me, I've been trying different things with the video version of my podcast, which no video this week, by the way, due to a technical hiccup. And I've also been playing with the compression settings on the audio version of my podcast as well. Here's the point. Whether you have 5 million downloads or 5 downloads per episode, you can always make changes if you think it will improve the show. Unless it really degrades the quality of your audio or your content, it's not going to cost you audience. Now, speaking of audience, podcast Facebook groups are always littered with the question, how do I grow my audience? Some are looking for hacks or cheap tricks. Others are willing to invest the time and effort into tried and true strategies. But this week's newsletter from Vancouver podcast company Jar Audio, Jar, breaks it down so beautifully simply. The one question to answer to grow your brand podcast audience: why should someone listen to my brand's podcast? Now, there are a million ways to try to game the charts, artificially increase your downloads, and otherwise stroke your own ego with your numbers. But if you want true, honest growth on your podcast, start with the content, whether it's a brand podcast or a personal podcast. Why would someone else, other than your mom maybe, want to listen? Why would they want to listen? If you can't answer that question, you've got to go back to the drawing board. Other podcast news this week, the IAB, or Interactive Advertising Bureau, projects that not only will podcasting revenue hit $1 billion this year, that it will hit $2 billion by 2023. For example, the New York Times announced their Q1 results from 2021. Revenue is overall up 6.6%, but here's the interesting thing. Their digital advertising revenue a year ago was 48.2% of the company's total revenue. Now that number, 61% of that company's total revenue. Digital audio. That's the New York Times. Also, iHeartMedia reported their first quarter earnings. Year-over-year numbers doubled in this space from 16 million to over 38 million. Now, worth noting, their total revenue is down 10% year-over-year. But hey, they have launched a self-service ad platform. You can create an ad. It'll run on your favorite podcast or your favorite radio station. Kind of looks like they're automating away the salespeople, just like they automated away the on-air DJs. I feel like I say this every week. I won't belabor this, but it's worth repeating. iHeartMedia and many other companies are focused on podcasting and digital audio. These are huge companies that have to answer to stockholders. The only way that radio is going to survive is if it's owned by smaller companies that can afford to invest in local markets and local talent that connect with their audiences. For iHeart, it's hard to care about Cheyenne when you have to worry about New York. All right, quick check-in on Apple Podcasts for this week. James Cridland of Pod News says they're now crawling his feed for new content every 20 minutes as opposed to every 2 hours. That's a good thing. When you publish content, Apple may see it faster now. And it seems the bugs are slowly being worked out of the new system. However, for some users, the new iOS update seems to download every episode of every single podcast ever that you subscribe to. This can be a major issue if you've got limited storage space left on your device. There's an article in today's show notes on how to fix that. Now, while Apple struggles, Spotify continues to revolutionize the podcast space. If you like a particular story in a podcast or a particular segment of it, you can now share that exact spot and timestamp in a podcast to social media through Spotify. For example, you can share today's episode at this spot, right here. And finally, if you want to know more about Clubhouse, it is now available on Android in the US And the venerable Edison Research is doing a webinar about all things Clubhouse this Tuesday, May 18th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Link to sign up for that in today's show notes. As always, stay healthy and stay safe, and I will talk to you next week. Later.
If you like what you just heard, share The Jag Show with someone else who's interested in podcasts. You can also follow The Jag Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit jagindetroit.com.